now. So first of all, really good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is well, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. For those that don't know me, I'm Rachel Anderson, RECCo's Director of Corporate Affairs, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. So why are we here today? For those newer or less familiar with RECCo, under the REIT Energy Code, we have a responsibility to annually develop and consult with you as our stakeholders on our draft forward work plan. So our draft forward work plan for 2026 to 2029 was published for consultation on the 15th of January, and that has a closing date of the 5th of February. Now, what that means is we're currently within a 15 working day consultation window, and we hope that we can use today's webinar to really support your understanding in terms of RECCo's strategic roadmap and inform your consultation responses. Really importantly, at the close of the consultation window, and obviously using today's webinar and any feedback that we get through the webinar, we'll be working very closely with the RECCo board to review and consider all of the responses through this consultation window before we publish a final version of our forward work plan towards the end of March. And that's very much in line with previous year's process. In terms of engagement across the development of our draft forward work plan, today is not the only engagement we've done with our stakeholders, and I know a number of you who were joining today's call joined us back in November, and that's where we held a webinar to gain initial feedback on our proposed priorities to really help us shape the draft publication. Today's webinar instead will focus more on us talking you through that strategic roadmap for the year ahead and beyond. And we're also going to be using today to explain how our planned activities align with regulatory and market developments, but using today to also answer your questions and inform your understanding of our roadmap and also your consultation responses. Don't worry though, if you've not had a chance to look at the document, like I said, today is purposely been designed so we can walk you through all the key components. So just in terms of some housekeeping and a few points to note from me, please do keep your cameras and microphones switched off during the speaker presentations, and that's because we're recording today. We'll be sharing the slides and any outputs from today, including the recording, directly with you, but also placing the recording on RECCo's corporate website and our YouTube channel and LinkedIn, and that's for the benefit of any colleagues that weren't able to join us today. We do encourage you to ask us your questions, and there's a couple of ways you can do that today. You can type in any questions within the Q&A functionality within Teams, but also we've got 3 dedicated Q&A sessions within the agenda. So please feel free to raise your virtual hand and Laura can bring you on camera and microphone to directly ask your questions. The last polite reminder from me is to just keep your questions relevant to the topics today, and that includes avoiding referencing any organisations, please. So that's our housekeeping. What can you expect in terms of the agenda? The agenda very much has been designed to purposely walk you through the key components of our forward work plan and therefore RECCo's priorities for the year ahead. We will start things off by hearing from RECCo's Chief Executive, Sid Cox. He's going to start things off by, first of all, giving a brief introduction in terms of RECCo and why we were first established by Ofgem and our role within the REIT energy market. And that's because we've had previous feedback when we've done these sorts of sessions that we shouldn't assume expert knowledge of RECCo for those newer to industry or newer to roles. Once Sid has given that brief introduction to RECCo, he'll then talk us through the strategic focus for the next year and what that means in terms of our 4 key priorities for the year ahead. Following Sid, we will then hear from other members of RECCo's executive team, exploring in more detail some of those key programmes and activities from the organisation. Of course, a key area for the next year is RECCo's transition to be a co-manager licensee and what that means in terms of our readiness as an organisation, but also what are those key changes that you can expect as our stakeholders over coming months. We'll then move on to our plans for evolving and modernising our service delivery. And that's not just to help us prepare for the future. Very much a key focus for us is continually improving the performance of our delivery for you, and also getting your feedback in terms of our service delivery and how we're responding to that. And we'll cover some of that within the agenda today. We'll also cover how RECCo is supporting future market developments, like in the space of consumer-led flexibility, and what that means in terms of some of our delivery at the moment and some of the key programs we're actively delivering against, like consumer consent and tariff interoperability. But also some of the analysis work that we'll be doing as an organisation that might help inform future REC changes. We'll then move on to the financial projections for the year ahead, and those were published within draft form within the end of the draft forward work plan. And just to highlight, there will be our final budget published towards the end of February, so in about a month's time. I'll then conclude the session and recap in terms of the consultation process and the outputs you can expect from RECCo as an organisation over the coming months. Like I said earlier on, we've also got 3 dedicated Q&A sessions dotted through the agenda, and you should be able to see those on the slide in front of you. So that's all I was going to say. I don't think we've had any initial questions. Let me just have a look. No initial questions have come in at the moment, so hopefully that all made sense to you. I really hope you find today useful. As with all of our webinars, we'll be doing a quick survey at the end just to get your feedback to make sure that you understood today and it was useful, and that will help us shape any future engagement sessions with you. So without further ado, what I'll do is I'll now pass you to Sid Cox.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. And as Rachel mentioned, I'm just going to provide a little bit of background about what RECCo is for those who are new to RECCo and what we do. I'm going to cover the context in which we set the forward work plan, and then I'm going to focus in on the 4 key priorities that we have, which our team members of the REC executive team, will then present. So starting with RECCo and its role, we were established as a not-for-profit company in 2019 to implement, manage and evolve the Retail Energy Code and supporting services on behalf of industry for gas and electricity. We are the custodian of the REC, the governance arrangements for the retail energy market, and make sure that they operate effectively against its objectives, guided by our mission. We are responsible for the efficient and effective operation of the REC and its supporting services, enabling a fair, efficient and increasingly consumer-focused retail energy market through secure and reliable services. We also act as an intelligent customer on behalf of you, designing, procuring and managing common market services to ensure that our delivery is effective, proportionate and value for money. We know that our current permission to operate is based on striving to deliver an excellent service today while ensuring we are fit for the future, anticipating and shaping tomorrow's policy changes and market developments. In doing this, we are guided by our strategic aims: perform, protect and progress. Together, these provide the framework for our decision making, balancing operational stability with necessary change. Moving on to context, you'll all know that the retail energy market is entering a pivotal period of change. Advancements in digital technology, the government's ambition on clear power and consumer-led flexibility, alongside Ofgem's preliminary strategic direction statement, means codes, market arrangements and services must evolve, and the pace of change will only accelerate. In our 5th year of operation, having listened to your feedback And as some of our original contracts reach their natural end, and with a code manager license about to be awarded to us, RECCo is at a clear transition point, which presents clear opportunity to evolve our arrangements and services to better support and serve you. In this, our 26 to 29 forward work plan, you will see that while embracing change and seizing the opportunity, our plan is to continue to deliver excellent and future fit retail energy market services, while simultaneously building the capability and resilience needed to support future market innovations and better and more consumer-focused outcomes. In addition to providing an excellent service to you, we have 4 key priorities. In the coming year, we will transition to becoming the licensed code manager for RECCo and its services. Central to this evolution is strengthening our accountability, the clarity of our role, and the expectations which are placed on RECCo by Ofgem, you, and all our stakeholders. We will ensure that we are fully prepared to meet the duties and obligations which will be placed upon us. We will strengthen our systems and digital services, update our delivery capability and operating model, working closely with existing and new service providers so we can operate at scale and support faster, more complex, digital-driven market changes. We will continue to deliver our established programs, ensuring we maintain operational stability and meet all existing commitments, including finalising MHHS, consumer consent and tariff interoperability. Looking to the future, we will be supporting consumer-led flexibility by taking a proactive approach in helping to shape emerging policy and rules, and by identifying potential retail energy market gaps. We will ensure that they are addressed, whether in the REC or other industry arrangements, making sure that future market changes are deliverable for industry and support positive consumer outcomes. Taken together, these 4 priorities balance continuity and necessary change. They signal our intent to anticipate rather than to react. By fully aligning with government policy and Ofgem's preliminary SDS, we will invest in and deliver new and upgraded, robust digital and data foundations. We will evolve our operating model and team for the code manager license role, and we will support you and all our stakeholders through the energy market transition to deliver better consumer outcomes. Under the guidance and ultimate accountability of the RECCo board, the responsibility for delivering these priorities is the collective effort of the RECCo team working with our delivery partners and all of you. Today, you'll hear from members of the RECCo executive team who are responsible for turning our key priorities into delivery, spanning governance, services, programs, data and digital, financial and commercial, and corporate affairs. Working together with our board, we have developed our draft forward work plan, and we are the ones who will be responsible for delivering it to you, for you. With that, what I'd like to do, I'd like to pass on to John Dixon, who'll cover the first of our key priorities. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Sid. Morning, everybody. Could you move us on to the next slide, please, Laura? Thank you. So I'd imagine many of you on the call are already fully aware of the code reform programme. And as it said, it's transformational for us as a future code manager licensee. So I won't dwell too much on the details of it. I'll just focus on the bits that will impact upon yourselves as code parties, interested stakeholders, etc. I think the key thing to focus on is that much of what we do as an organization doesn't change. Essentially, the code management license and code reform more generally is all about trying to facilitate the transformational change that government wants to make, the clean power agenda that Sid touched upon earlier, and making sure that there's nothing within code governance that is impeding that, as perhaps there might have been in the past, as it's building on the findings of the Competition and Markets Authority report from 2016, etc., and some of the issues around that. It does intersect quite a lot with the strategic direction statement that Sid mentioned. So you'll hear quite a few references to that, and I'll try and talk through how those two intersect. But I guess the key thing, as I say, this code reform work isn't fundamentally changing the services we provide. It is in some areas changing the way we provide it, the accountabilities that we have for providing them. And I guess the key thing around that are around the decision making within the retail energy code, in particular around the change management processes. So kind of a shift from voting upon changes at a change panel to making sure that the code manager itself is making decisions and is held accountable for them, for the rigor of them, for the veracity of those decisions, etc., and making sure they stack up against the evidence. That will all be informed and supported by continuing consultations with all interested parties and the establishment of a new stakeholder advisory forum, etc., which will provide input into those decisions, but not, as I say, voting upon them. The flip side of those additional responsibilities comes with additional accountabilities that come from it. So as you'd expect as a licensee, there'll be a whole swath of new reporting requirements to Ofgem, and we'd imagine that for the most part, those would be published reports that will also be made available to you as RECC parties and stakeholders. We will be, or rather, Ofgem will be consulting on the key performance metrics that I'd expect to see all code managers adhere to in future. I'm glad to say that all of the existing code bodies have been collaborating over the back end of 2025 on what those metrics might look like, what the practical considerations should be, how exactly we could report on things, the balance between quantitative versus qualitative measures, etc. And we understand Ofgem will be consulting on those fairly shortly. In terms of moving through to the impacts it has on us as an organisation, as Elizabeth will touch upon shortly, and as we've set out the board work plan, we will be creating a design authority team within RECCo to look at those change proposals that are coming through and make sure we've got subject matter expertise to hand on all of them, and make sure that we're as I say, bringing the best possible resources and evidence to making those decisions. And making sure that we are fully transparent in the rationale for our decisions going forward. We would expect the vast majority of them to still be made under the self-governance of the Retail Energy Code as now, but there will still be points of escalation through to Ofgem, and indeed there's been consultations about changing the statutory instruments that allow appeals to go through from Ofgem decisions onto the CMA. So an awful lot of the regulatory background remains the same. It's essentially just making sure that the code bodies themselves are much more empowered and accountable for what's happening on their codes. In terms of what we'll need to do over the coming year in advance of the licence coming into effect around November, we believe, Ofgem has already consulted upon changes to be made to all of the codes to ensure that there is a consistent means of prioritising changes that are going through. All of those changes will have to give reference to or have regards to the SDS, and essentially those that are relevant to that SDS program of work will find their way to the top of the stack. But we will also be looking to continue the relative prioritization of all the other changes as well. So in much the same way as we currently do with the REC, that will continue the current methodology, albeit we'll be making sure that those SDS changes kind of find their way to them, and we can demonstrate that we're prioritizing our resources upon those. I think, well, I'll come on to a little bit more about the SDS in a moment, but in terms of the other things, later on in this year, we'll be carrying out consultations as to how we'll set up the staff. We're still waiting for some clarity from Ofgem in terms of what the final requirements will be on that. There's been 2 consultations so far on code manager license requirements, and we're expecting a further consultation on the final drafting of the code manager licenses later this year, and we'll carry out the kind of implementation and mobilisation activities once we've seen the finality of those requirements. We will also be establishing a beefed up cross-code steering group. As touched upon earlier, there's already been a lot of collaboration, as you'd obviously see, amongst code bodies in terms of how to enact these reforms within our relative codes. And I think we've seen in the Ofgem documentation and through the work that we've been doing so far, there is continuing and there will be an enduring need for much more collaboration than perhaps we've seen in the past. So where we'll all have obligations to deliver individual delivery plans against the SDS, in some of those areas there will be, as you'd expect, kind of cross-code implications and interactions and interdependencies. And I think a beefed up version of the cross-code steering group will help with all of that. And we'd imagine there to be new terms of reference, etc., potentially new membership of that CCSG to help all of the code bodies with that work. I guess the key thing that we want to get across though is that we're not expecting any impacts on the day-to-day operations of what we do. Services will continue as normal. As I say, we're not expecting there to be any kind of change freeze to the RECCo change program, etc. So we'll make this as seamless as possible for everybody who's a RECCo party, with much of the work been done internally. So the proverbial kind of swan graceful on the surface, paddling furiously underneath. As I was saying, a lot of what is happening with code reform is essentially to help government ultimately deliver that energy transformation that all political parties, barring perhaps reform, are committed to. So the decarbonisation of the energy industry. The powers have been strengthened through the fairly recent Energy Act. So as I was saying, Ofgem can now issue a strategic direction statement to all of the code bodies. That in turn is informed by the government's strategic policy statement. So that SPS, the policy statement, and advice from NESO as the independent national energy systems operator will inform Ofgem in terms of what needs to be done on the codes, and that will drive what we believe will be an annual SDS publication. We believe the timing of that will change slightly going forward, but we're expecting that the SDS will essentially follow Ofgem's own forward work plan and be consulted upon, and that in turn will drive our own forward work plan each year. I would say that this isn't all a kind of one-way traffic. We've seen in the past that Ofgem, when they're consulted on things and issues are pointing out to them, they've been open to including things within the SDS. So I would encourage everybody to engage in that consultation next year on the SDS. We'd expect it will again be a preliminary one pending the effective dates of the license, etc. But do engage in this, and we've seen, particularly with things like the, as we said in the forward work plan, the issue around safe isolation providers and the fact that it's difficult for an awful lot of existing installers who are perhaps putting low carbon technologies in homes to get the right permissions to isolate the property, to work on it safely. So we're looking at that as a governance body, how we can perhaps tackle that fairly low level issue in many respects, but an important one given the safety concerns of it and the fact that that is something that's stymieing the rollout, the scalability of some of these low carbon technologies. So it's important that we think both strategically and tactically about how we can help facilitate those fairly high level objectives within the SDS, identify what it is that will push them along. And I'd imagine there's no silver bullet to many of them. We may see a range of changes coming forward that will help facilitate one of those given objectives rather than it be a single thing that we implement. I would also say that in some of the areas within the SDS, it's not yet absolutely clear what the changes to RECCo or indeed some of the other codes will be. So it's a typical kind of 3-horizon approach to the SDS, with X now being the things that we can all go away and think about in terms of the next 2-year horizon. Then there'll be a think and plan horizon of 2 to 3 years, and then kind of listen and wait, where Ofgem and government are still thinking about what is required, and that'd be your kind of 3 to 5 year horizon. But within all of those three, I think there are some areas where we'd all like greater clarity on exactly what is required or what is expected against each of those objectives. And in some areas, there are things where we are making assumptions about what would be required to deliver certain objectives. So, for instance, there's an area around promoting investment in the rollout of further onshore infrastructure. We believe that's all part and parcel of the Planning and Infrastructure Act, and particularly a scheme within that that's colloquially referred to as the Pounds for Pylon scheme, which looks an awful lot like Green Deal insofar as there'll be a payment associated with the property rather than with the consumers. You'll see within our forward work plan we have made some provision within our resourcing and within our budget to work on that, because we recognise that there are some interactions between that policy proposal and our systems and services. We're still to wait on final confirmation on who will do what, and it may be that RECCo is not the primary delivery body, but nonetheless we'll have to carry out some consequential changes to our systems and services. So to say, we've made a prudent allocation within the budget for that. If it's subsequently confirmed that that's all been done elsewhere within the industry, and we're not required to do that work, then we'll make adjustments in the budget and take it back out. But we think it's right that we try to anticipate where there are impacts from that SDS planning and make prudent plans for us. So hopefully that helps demonstrate that there is a read through from government policy, regulatory policy, and our own forward work plan. But as I say, that's not the be all and end all of the forward work plan. There's still things that we are generating changes and improvements ourselves, and that'll be the focus of what Elizabeth and Pete will come on to in a moment. So I think that's all for me in terms of my babbling on, and then we've got some time for Q&A.
We do. Thank you, John. So does anyone have any questions on anything that you've heard so far? Anything on RECCo's transition to be a licensee or the Ofgem's SDS? I can't see any that have come through on the Q&A, but just as a reminder, you can ask your questions two ways. You can submit your questions through typing them into the Q&A function, or you can raise your hand and Laura would be able to bring you onto camera. Okay. Don't want to rush ahead. Okay, we are going to stop and pause for two further Q&A sessions throughout the agenda. So an opportunity to gather any thoughts and questions and submit them further on in the agenda. Okay, so I think we will continue, and that is with Elizabeth Lawler. Over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. I was on that. Am I going to be saying good morning or good afternoon? I think I'm right on the cusp of it, aren't I? So by my clock, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to talk to you about the RECC services, and from a RECC services perspective, this coming year is largely a continuation and a consolidation of the work from previous years. So if you've had the opportunity to look at the forward work plan, a lot of what is contained within that will be very recognisable to you. The key difference is that this year we're moving from our thinking and planning phase into much more of an implementation and delivery. So the slides I've got that I'm going to take you through today focus on the sorry, I've got a little pop-up to shut that down. Focus on the two primary areas that impact you most as users of the RECC. So that's the Code Manager and our Code Manager Evolution project, and our Inquiry Services Evolution project. So both of these recognise that strategic focus that Sid spoke about in terms of modernising our systems and services. However, what I would say is that there is work ongoing across the full scope of the RECC services, and that is covered in more detail in the forward work plan document itself that I won't have the time to get into today. So if we have a look now, and the slide is there. So John spoke just now about the introduction of the Code Manager license. And from an operations perspective, the first part of this year, our primary objective is ensuring readiness for that license award. So many of you will know that when the RECC and RECCo were first established, we were done so with the concept of an independent and intelligent code manager. And we've been operating our services that way since 2021. As a result, we already meet the majority of the Code Manager license conditions. Our core systems, processes, functions and resources are already well established and align with those requirements. However, we will need to evidence that position to Ofgem as part of its own assurance and readiness process. And as John alluded to, there are some changes that we will need to make just to ensure that we're set up in the right way and we've excuse me, we can manage our ongoing compliance. So a focus then in the first half of this year is RECCo readiness. We will need to do things like establish the stakeholder advisory forum to ensure that industry is able to input directly to us. Under the licence, the code manager will be responsible for the decision making on REC change proposals. We absolutely recognise the importance of ensuring that throughout that change process, we've got robust analysis. We fully encourage industry to participate in consultations, that our processes are transparent, that we are accountable, and that we are acting in an impartial manner. As such, we have established a market design team within RECCo, and we will stand up the REC Design Authority. And that DA will have the responsibility for managing changes and working with the Stakeholder Advisory Forum to promote confidence in the integrity of that process. It's absolutely critical that you have got confidence in the way that we are working, the way that we are managing change, and the way that those decisions are being taken. As we evolve and get ready for what's coming down the line, I'm particularly keen that we build on the strengths that we've already established as a code manager. So we've got to maintain our current high standards whilst introducing any new requirements that flow down from the licence. We haven't had an opportunity to publish them yet, but we have had our customer satisfaction survey results. They came into us last week. Thank you so much for those of you who participated in the survey. The results are really very, very good this year, up on last year. And what they do is they underline how important it is that we continue to meet your needs and expectations as we deliver some of the changes that come alongside the licence. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. So REC performance assurance is the one area of the code manager that will see specific change in this coming year. When the REC was established back in and really got going in terms of code management services in 2021, it brought with it the first formal performance assurance framework into our retail governance arrangements. And as we come to the end of our contract with our existing external RPA service provider and recognising code manager licence, we've taken the opportunity to review the operating model, how the performance assurance framework is established and operated, and we will be making changes to that service from the 1st of September this year. Essentially, you can see from the triangle that responsibility for setting the long-term REC performance assurance strategy will move directly into RECCo. That's going to allow us closer alignment with our strategic objectives, the things that we set out in the forward work plan, and also Ofgem's strategic direction statement. That means that we will be able to communicate a clearer picture to industry about the direction and the intent of the PAF. We're also going to build in an integration and oversight element into the service, and that's to ensure that you receive a unified and joined up experience, whatever part of that performance assurance framework that you engage with. And then if we look to the bottom part of the triangle, in line with our standard intelligent sourcing principles, those delivery and support functions will continue to be placed with those best able to deliver them. And that's from a capabilities perspective, but also taking into account commercial considerations. From an industry perspective, your obligations under the REC remain unchanged. From a service perspective, we hope that you will receive a clearer view of the performance assurance framework. We're looking to pursue a more outcomes-driven approach. We are going to be focusing on those perennial thorny issues that we know impact performance across the industry, but particularly looking to share best practice so that we can address them. And of course, as I said earlier, we want to strengthen the things that are already working well. So there'll be continued investment in highly valued areas of the service, such as those performance assurance check-ins. If we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So Sid mentioned it earlier, we've spoken about our focus on modernising our systems and our services. The previous slides were more on the people and the processes element of the Code Manager, but we are also implementing system modernisation, and that's with the rollout of the new RECCo portal and our digital services. Once again, it's going to be a busy first half to this year. We've targeted September for the go live to align with the other Code Manager activities. I referred earlier to our customer satisfaction feedback. So our digital tools are often highlighted to us as the key area for improvement. So that includes things like accessibility, search and navigation, better targeted communications, clearer access to information about change, and the actual digital RECCo itself. So user experience, UX as I've learnt to call it, is therefore the central part of this development. And we're very grateful to those of you who've already inputted into the project, sharing your requirements and feedback with us. Building on that theme then, our intention is to start a soft launch, a rollout of features across May to July this year, to gather early feedback on what we're starting to implement, with that formal launch coming at the start of September. At the same time that we launch the new RECCo portal, we're going to take the opportunity to respond to your feedback about the need to streamline communication and the potential confusion between RECCo and the RECCo Code Manager, and the multiple channels that we have there. So the new RECCo portal will therefore also launch a single unified brand across those services. If this is something that you are interested in and would like to be involved in, then please just reach out and drop us a line and we can get you linked in with our digital services team. If we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So, inquiry services evolution. This year, RECCo will be moving into the next phase of the inquiry services development. It is absolutely essential that we ensure that these critical market services remain fit for purpose as the market evolves. And so whilst generally speaking, both the gas and electricity inquiry services have performed well, what we absolutely see is a growing demand and evolving stakeholder needs. And this means that the existing model is no longer the optimal one for the future. So we've seen this increased system usage, and we know that at peak times we do experience operational strain. This highlights the need for a more resilient and a more scalable service. In the short term, we'll continue to implement fixes to address immediate issues, so the services will continue to operate. But in parallel, we are going to progress a move now from the legacy model to a modern dual fuel service. This new model is designed to be more flexible and future ready than the current arrangements. It will improve resilience and scalability, and it will reduce the costs to industry compared to maintaining the legacy systems. So the stage of the process that we're at now, we've begun the procurement process with the new services with a view to putting a contract in place in this spring. Once we are out of this commercial phase, where obviously we have to be mindful of how much information we can share, we will come out to you and we will engage directly in significantly more detail so that you have absolute confidence in what's going to happen. However, what I can say now, and what I will assure you, is that whilst the underlying technology is relatively straightforward, we absolutely recognise the criticality of this service and the complexity of the processes that it supports. It is of primary importance that we are able to maintain uptime, response times, and resilience, especially during peak demand. So recognising all of that, we're going to establish a phased migration plan. We're going to use the API gateway to support that, to minimise risk, minimise disruption for service users, and to ensure that there's no degradation in performance as we go through these changes. So as part of that phased migration, we'll look to things such as parallel running, clear cutover plans. We will engage with you early. We will signal clear timelines. We will offer full support throughout that transition, and we will minimise the changes to how you work. So to confirm, in terms of expected timelines, we're looking at contract award by spring of this year. Migration of the gas inquiry service will go first. That's planned for July of next year, 2027, and the full migration to complete, so the electricity inquiry service as well, by July of 2028. As I say, further updates will be shared to help industry prepare and understand any actions that may be needed. But if you have got any questions in the meantime, again, please reach out directly and we'll be very happy to take them. I know we're going to come to a Q&A in a little bit, but I'm going to hand over to Pete first to talk to you about some of our other programmes, and then we'll come back for Q&A if there's anything that's come in. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Peter, and I'm a husband, father, proud dyslexic, and RECCo's Director of Data Technology and Transformation. We've heard from John focusing on one of the strategic areas around code license, Elizabeth's focus around maintaining an excellent service, and also some of the delivery programs. I'll continue that delivery program theme and focus on the fourth strategic area around flexibility. So for those of you who have read the government's recent consultations, there is a significant ambition to deliver consumer-led flexibility. Currently, we're at around 1.6 gigawatts of consumer-led flexibility. The goal by 2030 is to reach 10 to 12, so a 650% increase. And then moving into 2050, the numbers get even bigger to around 75 gigawatts. So RECCo, we recognise this is a significant market shift, and many people on this call will be looking at their business models and how can they use this opportunity to improve their business, to change their business. So as Sid said at the start, we're not resting on our laurels. We're looking at what can we do around the RECC to make things better. So the first thing we'll do is look at this clean flexibility roadmap and what can customer-led flexibility actually means. We'll analyse the potential market scenarios and the customer impacts. We'll collaborate with DESNZ and Ofgem, and that will ultimately end in a RECC action plan that you can see at the bottom here. Some of those actions we will continue and deliver through the RECC, but some of those actions we will probably recognise require other code changes or other areas, and we will support those organisations in starting and executing that work. Ultimately, that means we will then in 27-28 have a much clearer idea as to what are the changes that are to come that will result in further projects and further activities in relation to flexibility. To that, you could call it a discovery piece of work, and that will ultimately support you and the wider industry on how the market can change for your benefit and the consumer's benefit. Moving on to the next programme, tariff interoperability is a key part of delivering this flexibility. So for those of you who are not familiar with tariff interoperability, this is effectively the standardization of tariff data schemes so that every organisation has the same data scheme, and those data schemes can then be consumed by consumers, other organisations, to help provide energy efficiency or flexibility services. Currently, if we look at the bottom part of the slide, we are in the middle of consultation. So thank you to the 25 organisations that responded to the RECC and DESNZ consultation. That was hugely appreciated. We are now reviewing that consultation, and that will engage us in how do we finalise the build and test phase, finalise that detailed design, ultimately then resulting in the launch of the RECC tariff interoperability 6 months after 9 months, get that right, 9 months after it goes live in the RECC. At this point, I would like to highlight that some of the feedback we've had around timings of delivery, so the length of time that you as retailers will have to implement these changes. We completely recognise that, and some of the feedback has been particularly helpful as to why and what parts of that are challenging. We are now actively engaging with DESNZ and Ofgem into what is the most appropriate way to deliver that. And when I come on to the next slide in a moment, there is a link here to consumer consent. So what I would say is thank you very much for providing that feedback. It's an active dialogue that we're having with Ofgem and DESNZ, and we hope through the updated consultation we will be able to provide a more considered timeline that both reduces the amount of work on organisations and ultimately then provides a better service to you and consumers. Moving into 27-28, there will be the addition of further tariffs. So for those of you who know the details of tariff interoperability, it does have a narrow focus on a certain set of tariffs. That will have to expand in the future to include things like time of use tariffs, block tariffs, all of those different things that support flexibility. So moving into the later years, that's where we'll ultimately extend the scheme. Moving on to consumer consent. So this is our third activity, material activity in the space of flexibility. For those of you who don't know what it is, we are currently consulting and engaging around delivering a consumer consent service that will allow consumers to share their data that they currently are theoretically the owners of under GDPR and share that with organisations that they believe will be able to provide them a benefit. That will ultimately be delivered through something called a trust framework. So a trust framework is effectively a set of rules that allows one organisation and another organisation to trust each other. So this should allow those organisations that are interested ultimately to reduce your time to market, to reduce the kind of engagement you need where you'd have to have bilateral contracts. You wouldn't need that in the case of being part of a trust framework. So it will give you some efficiencies with regards to business process. The way we will do that, looking at the bottom half of the slide, is that we will continue our stakeholder engagement and collaboration. So Ofgem have recently handed over the working groups, and those working groups are now open for anyone to join. So similar to what Elizabeth said around digital services, please get in contact with us if you do want to be part of those working groups. The way it will operate is there'll be a general one and then there'll be specific ones on topics should you want to bring experts in. I must note that this same point applies to tariff interoperability. I didn't mention it on the last slide, but here we will go into a phase of engagement and consultation, and once again it's open for industry to engage in if you're not already. Moving further along that timeline at the bottom, we'll look to finalise that design in summer, and by finalising the design that would include things like detailed REC drafting, technical designs, API specifications, etc. Ultimately all being launched in March 2027. Moving into 27-28, there will be addition of further data sets. So the starting data set is energy usage data. I spoke about on the previous slide tariff interoperability and the opportunity to reuse parts of this system and avoid rework for the retailers. This is the part that we're engaging with DESNZ and Ofgem currently, and I would see that then coming as part of 27-28. We've also had an instruction from the regulator to ensure that SDR, so the smart data repository that Alexon is doing, and FMAR, the Flexibility Market Asset Register, which is effectively for device control, is integrated with consumer consent. So all being well, by the end of 27, we should be at a space where ultimately energy usage data, tariff data, and device control can be consented from one system, which therefore means that you as organisations who are looking at the opportunities in the flexibility space would be able to interface with these easier and maximise those business opportunities. So that concludes the 3 projects around flexibility. Now is the opportunity for questions.
It is. So we've had a couple of questions come in. We had a more recent question specifically around consumer consent. So I think if we address that one first of all, Pete, and then we had a question from Carl, which we can come on to in a moment. I think Brian's going to take that one for us around performance incentives in our service provider contracts. So Pete, the first question from Matthew was, will the consent service allow easier PSR management for home movers and switchers?
So PSR data is not currently within scope of consumer consent for the MMP, which is due to be delivered in March. However, there is a long-term ambition to include PSR data within the programme. So that's when I talked about additional data sets coming in, that will come in. One thing we importantly need to consider around PSR is that it contains potentially sensitive data. So we would have to up some of the activities that the system does. So it's not something we treat lightheartedly. It's something that is under active consideration, and I expect it to be something that comes in 2028.
So hopefully that answers your first question, Matthew. Please let us know if you've got any follow-up questions to that. Matthew has, though, also asked, and hopefully this you understand the question more than I do, Pete. It's around Electrolink's project, and is it complementary or competition to this consumer consent?
I'm not sure which project Matthew's referring to there from Electrolink. So maybe he can provide a bit of information, but whilst he's potentially typing that in, there was, to begin with, effectively a comparison between the DCC, RECCo and Electrolink as to with regards what the best delivery body was. And that was something that Ofgem consulted on in 2024-25. Their decision was then to give that to RECCo in April for reasons around governance, technical capability, service capability. So there shouldn't be any sort of competition because that decision has been made by the regulator, but I don't know what project Matthew is referring to.
So Matthew, on that one, it might be good that we reach out to you after this session, just so we can make sure that we've answered your question on that one. If I could then ask Brian to take the next question. We had a question from Carl, all around, will there be any third-party performance incentives introduced to ensure any systems or processes that REC rely on will meet expectations? And I think, Carl, your question was more on the back of code reform and the SDS. So Brian, if you wouldn't mind taking that question for us.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to answer it from the perspective of service provider contracts, because I think that's where it's coming from. So I think the very short answer is yes. But I would just like to expand on the kind of structure and how we do it to give a flavour of our approach to contracting. So in all of our contracts, where a service provider is providing a service to RECCo, we have service levels. What we seek to do is, rather than take a blanket approach to service levels, we will make those service levels appropriate and targeted to the nature of the contract that's being provided. So in some cases, they may be quantitative targets only. Do this by that date, achieve this %, whatever the case may be. In other instances, we have a much more refined process where we will have quantitative and qualitative, and in some instances, one's linked to stakeholder survey feedback that you guys will have participated in. So we target it in that regard. Also with the service levels, what we then have is, and service levels go broader than just service credits. They reflect the overall service delivery of it, and they can have contractual implications broader than just service credits. What we will then identify is KPIs, and associated with those KPIs, we will have service credits. If the service level isn't met, there's an automatic trigger of the service credit. In all cases, regardless of value, if the service credit is triggered, we collect. We have them in place, they're a contractual measure, therefore we do implement them. And that is what we have in all of our contracts, bar one. we have one contract with one organisation, which is essentially a charity, and therefore they can't accept service credits in that regard. But that doesn't mean we don't have service levels even with that organisation to ensure that they deliver on their performance promises. I hope that answers the question.
I'll give us a quick thumbs up if we've answered your question, but if not, please do keep your questions coming and we can come to those in our final Q&A a little bit later on in the agenda. So Brian, actually the next session is with you, so I will hand back over to you. Thank you.
I was going to say good afternoon, but I've said that to everyone, so well, I will say thank you all for attending today. So far in the last 45 minutes, nearly an hour, you've heard my colleagues set out what our key strategic priorities and objectives for the coming year are. We've also set out our commitment to deliver, evolve and transform the RECC services, and alongside that deliver the new initiatives which will enable a more consumer focused retail market. This approach together over the next year and beyond will ensure that we provide fit for purpose RECC services. Elizabeth spoke about securing the future of the RECC services for the future. We'll provide those RECC services now and in the future. That in turn will enable industry to perform their operational needs off the back of the inquiry services, etc. And it'll also allow them to protect their regulatory and governance compliance obligations. Against that, we are very, very aware that we are spending industry and consumer money, considering that our costs can be passed through now as part of the price cap. And therefore, everything we do, we must do in an efficient and economical way, and which critically delivers value for industry and for consumers. Before we get to the 26 budget, which we're going to talk about, we would first like to share with you some information regarding the expected outturn for the current year. So I'll just give a moment for people to read that slide. In this current year, which I'll refer to as 2025, we're showing an expected full year underspend of circa about £7 million against our original budget. Now that's a combination of about £6.5 million underspend and additional income of about £500,000. In addition to the costs that we recover from suppliers, there are other costs which contribute to the cost recovery for RECCo, and they come from either user pay services, access to the inquiry services, or they come from apportionment of the inquiry services to the electricity distribution network operators. The key drivers for this underspend, which we are required to return to industry as part of the under the RECC, the key drivers are: we negotiated cost reductions on certain RECC services in this current year in 2025. They impact both the current year and future years. So they were either changes to services, changes to commercial arrangements, whatever the drivers were. What we also had, in recognising that we have some substantial investment programs running and looking at the future direct services, we took a very targeted approach to the use of the change investment allowance. We don't want to be paying to upgrade services now and then upgrade them as part of any procurement activity in the near future. We also adopted a revised procurement approach for the inquiry services. Elizabeth spoke about that earlier. That's a timing issue. We haven't incurred certain costs in this year, but we will incur them in next year. And we also adopted a revised location delivery strategy for our digital services. That delivered significant economic benefit to RECCo, both in this current year and in the subsequent years, which in turn will flow through to the end users. Unfortunately, we had to close. We were running a theft proof of concept trial with the City of London Police in the year. We were looking to implement a energy theft enforcement service, but because of the emergence of the national policing strategy, the City of London Police, who were in a unique position to deliver this service, they felt they were unable to take it to full operation. So that unfortunately we had to close that during the year, and there was a cost saving on that, and we will return that money to industry. Of the 7 million or so that we're expecting to underspend for the full year, we have returned 5.5 million within the invoices that we issued earlier at the back part of last week. So we've already returned 5.5 million of that to industry. The balance will be returned pending confirmation as part of our statutory audit. And again, that will complete that into the summer months and return it expected against the October 2026 invoices. If we can go to the next slide, please, Laura. So now we're looking at the budget for the coming year. So this is our draft budget. We will publish a final budget in February, and alongside that final budget, or included in that final budget, we will also publish our longer term projections for, let's say, years 2 and for what we call years 2 and 3 through to 2029. The draft budget for 26 is 66.6 million. And this is a 14% increase, more than we were expecting for 2026. We shared with you our indicative projections for 26 this time last year. Now we're showing the draft, and it's about 14% higher. And we are going to explain here today. As I said, we'll publish our final budget, and we'll get into more of the detail around how each of those budget line items are made up in February. But for today, we want to focus on a dive into what drives this cost uplift. If we look forward, and just building on what my colleague said, was our key deliverables for the future are: we must secure the future delivery of current and future RECC services. We must deliver an expanded and likely to further expand remit being given to us by Ofgem and DESNZ. And we will also become the RECC code manager licensee. That in and of itself is going to bring a cost impact into the organisation. Our budget for next year includes all the resources to achieve this. So if we look at that 14%, where is it higher? Of that 14%, 4% is on core activities. It's a relatively small amount of money, but nonetheless we need to explain it. And it reflects the impact of our expanded role. The bulk of it, 10% out of the 14%, is the inclusion of a contingent allowance for CSS re-procurement costs. And we will talk about that in a bit more detail on the coming slides. So they're the two key buckets. It's gone up 4% is due to an increase in our core activities. 10% is due to the inclusion of a contingent allowance in the budget. If we can move forward, please, Laura. So, summary of some of the key components of the budget. What we're going to be doing in 2026. Well, we're going to deploy a new in-house delivery capability. Elizabeth referenced that when we was talking about the performance assurance regime earlier. We're going to deliver on 7 projects that we are currently in flight. We initiated them in 25, 26, and they will continue into the coming year. There is delivery of 2 new projects, and they are designed to support a flexible market development and protect consumers' interests. We'll also become the licensed RECC code manager. What this means is we are going to have an increase in our headcount, and if our headcount goes up, our people costs go up. The reason for the increase in the headcount and the associated people cost is insourcing of activities that we are taking from service providers, new activities that we are required to do, not least code manager license compliance. We've also identified economic savings within projects, economic reasons for increasing headcount because we had long-term contractor requirements within certain projects, and we considered it better to recruit those individuals, retain that knowledge, and access the economic benefits of doing so of employees rather than contractors. And we have our ongoing commitment to capability development within the organisation. Our projects for the coming year are designed to do 3 things. They're designed to deliver long-term RECC service viability, designed to improve performance and deliver value for money. The DCC procurement costs, or the CSS procurement costs, is probably a better way of phrasing them. We've included a contingent allowance of 5.7 million. We've included that within the budget for absolute transparency. And I want to reiterate is that we are working very closely with DCC to achieve the best outcome for consumers and industry. Both of us are absolutely aligned on that objective, and there are different options on the table for consideration at the moment. And whilst we have a view of what we think is the best option, we have to move to creating an evidence and a business case to demonstrate that we know it is the best option. And that's the work we'll be doing over the coming weeks with DCC. If we can move to the next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. This slide is a replication of what we've included in the budget. We think it's very important that we are absolutely transparent on our costs and show where the money is being spent. And it is designed to provide industry with an understanding of where our costs are incurred. Where is that 66.6 million going? Where are we spending it? So 64%, or another way, 2 out of every 3 quid that we spend relates to the delivery, evolution, or change of RECCo services, which as Sid talked about earlier, they are for you, they are for industry. Circa 30%, roughly the remaining £1 out of every 3 quid, that relates to the transformation of the RECCo services. And that is either new services to meet new market needs, as referenced by Pete, consumer consent, tariff interoperability, etc., or to secure the long-term future of existing services, as referenced by Elizabeth, the inquiry services being a case in point. The remaining bit, 6% of our overall costs, are those costs related to the operation of RECCo as a corporate entity. And that is to ensure that we meet all of our contractual obligations, all of our compliance obligations, everything to Companies Act, insurance, etc., etc., the costs of running the company. If we can move to the next slide, please, Laura. So given that this is the single biggest contributor to the overall cost increase over and above what we were expected, and again, I want to reiterate, we are absolutely working closely with DCC to determine the best option. What we wanted to absolutely do is secure future services, deliver service improvements, and fundamentally not increase the cost burden on industry and consumers. So, a bit of background. 4 of the key contracts that DCC has with its service providers are due to expire in 2027. There is 2 options available in this case. Either there is a let those contracts expire and carry out a full procurement project, and that has got a price tag of £9 million associated with it. The alternative is extend those contracts, and DCC has the right to do that within those contracts, enhance those contracts or improve those contracts where available, and extend them to 2029. And that is one of the options that we will need to consider. Oh, so what I've done there. We've taken that £9 million. That is to reflect the back-to-back arrangement of what DCC has included within their ex-ante budget and business plan submissions to Ofgem, as they are required to do under their licence. So we've had to back-to-back it within the REC budgets. We've included that for full transparency with industry. But again, we're working very, very closely to ensure we get the best outcome for industry. We just want to be clear that the inclusion of this allowance in the budget, it's certainly not an acceptance by RECCo of the procurement option. As I said, we need to get from what we think is the best option to knowing which is the best option. And it certainly isn't an acceptance of the costs associated with that. It's a contingent allowance that we've included in the budget. We will need to recover that money. In the event that we do not use that money, and we get to an option where we are going for the extension, which should bring a much reduced cost tag, then we will return any monies that we have collected that we're not going to use, and we will adjust our charges accordingly into the year. We won't wait till January of next year to do so. So if we can go to the next slide, and I have been given a time warning. So on the REC services, these are the services that RECCo is required to provide. The REC says RECCo shall procure the REC services and has responsibility to deliver those to market. So they are the ones which are ultimately we procure as an intelligent consumer on behalf of industry, but the ultimate beneficiary and user of those is industry. If we exclude the DCC procurement impact, and we've shown that as a separate line, the expected costs for 2026 are lower than we expected for that year. That's a result. We've secured some cost reduction in 2025, and as I said earlier, they will flow through to future years. We also had the benefit of the revised location delivery strategy for digital services, and that will flow through into not just 26, but also future years. And then the impact of a revised approach to delivery of theft initiatives. The fact that we didn't take forward the Energy Theft Enforcement Service trial to full operation, that does not mean that we are not going to continue to invest and look and develop on energy theft services. And you can see on the screen there is a movement from 25 to 26 to reflect that. I think it's very clear that we need to highlight and say, yes, they are an increase on 2025. So for next year, we're expecting 39 million. Even if I take out the 6 for central switching services, it's still more than the 32 that we have this year. Now, that reflects the impact of indexation. Nearly all of our contracts were out of that initial fixed price term, that initial period where we fix the prices, and then we're into indexation and they go up annually. It also reflects any improvements that we have delivered, enhancements in the service in 2025, where there's an enduring impact. And then we also have, as I mentioned earlier, the new code manager license. It is going to have a cost impact on the organization. If we can go to the next slide, please. Investment projects, quite a long list. There's 9 in total. They are required to secure the future of the RECCo services, the inquiry services. We have the need to continue to deliver market projects, MWHS. We also are coming to the fruition of the delivery of the infrastructure to deliver a better digital user and enhanced code manager user experience, digital services. And we're also delivering new market model services, consumer consent and tariff interoperability. The costs are higher in 2026 than they are in 2025. And that is a combination of a couple of things. It's that there is natural cost peaks in projects. As soon as you start building things, you have to start paying organizations to do that. So you will have a natural uptick within that project. We've also had a revised procurement approach, notably around the inquiry services. We have giving money back that we haven't incurred in 25, but unfortunately we will need to spend it in 2026. And a new deployment approach for the performance assurance capability. And there's also timings associated with milestone payments on digital services. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I think this slide covers the final 3 sort of buckets of cost within our budget. And I'm going to deal with the bottom 2 first. Change investment. We include within our budget an allowance to cover fund functional and non-functional changes to RECCo services. That's what it's designed to do. What I also want to be clear on, it is not there as a slush fund to allow us to cover shortfalls in our operating costs or shortfalls in our project costs or shortfalls anywhere else. It is there for the investment in the RECCo services, and we've maintained it at the 2025 level. It's very likely that is going to need to go up in future years, reflecting the fruition of multiple services that will come on live in 27, 28, etc. Our contingency, we've got a company level contingency. We've maintained it at 2025 level, and it's less than about 2% of our total budget. It's a requirement of the future code manager license that you have to include a contingency within your budgets. So we've got one in. We recognize that our approach is that we recognize the cost where we can recognize the cost and therefore keep low level of company contingency. If we identify a project, we seek to identify the costs associated with that project. Looking at RECCo's operating costs, they're the resources required so RECCo can perform all its functions. They're higher than we were expecting for 2026, and that's driven by the reasons I gave earlier. but we overall have an increase in our headcount, and we've given an analysis of that within the forward work plan, within the budget section of the forward work plan. We're bringing services in-house. We need people internally rather than paying service provider people. We're required to do new things, consumer consent, code manager license. And it is more economic for us to recruit than to contract, specifically around business analyst roles and technical analyst resource. And we're also continuing to invest in developing a future talent pool. We're hiring in development roles into the organisation. I think that's my last slide. Yes.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
So, thanks, Brian. If you could stay there, we do have a question for you. And actually, Laura, it might be useful to go to Brian's second slide where it lists the budget for this year, because we had a question from Victoria around confirming the difference between the total table figure, and I think, Brian, you might have mentioned verbally it was a £66 million budget. So I think, could you just confirm for Victoria's benefit and the audience benefit what the budget figure is? It's as included within the slide, isn't it, in front of everyone?
Yeah, I think I can confirm that it's obvious I can't add up. It is 66.6. And that number should, that first five, it should say 66,598. So that's my fault. That's a typo. So apologies on that.
Okay, brilliant. Does anyone have any more questions for Brian or any of our speakers? I just want to pause there to make sure that we can answer any of your questions that you have. Matthew, I know you've come back in terms of the question you asked, so I think it'll probably be just useful that Pete reaches out to you after this session just to make sure that he understands the project you're referring to, if that's all right. Fabulous. So is there any more questions from anyone? No? Please do reach out to us, like you've heard from all of the speakers and the exec team today. We really do want to hear from you. We want to help you with any questions that you have. So please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions or anything that you'd like us to clarify after this session. Our doors are always open to speak to you. I think if we can move on to the next steps slide, then please, Laura, thank you. All I wanted to do was quickly recap in terms of the consultation process we're in. As the slide says, we're currently in a consultation window. Responses are due until the 5th of February, and you have an opportunity to provide any of your responses to the consultation questions via either our strategy team email, or we've also developed an online form for those that might find submitting your responses to the questions in the forward work plan easier that way. As Brian mentioned in his presentation, we are going to be publishing our final budget, and that's going to be before the 20th of February. And to supplement that publication, we'll be holding a budget focus webinar on the 25th of February. So you can look out for information in terms of that webinar shortly. And we'd love to see as many of you on that webinar as possible. So I think that is all I was going to say. We would love to get your feedback in terms of how you found today and if it was useful. All feedback is incredibly helpful to help us shape these sessions for you in the future. So Laura will share a link to that survey to you within the Teams and also within a follow-up email alongside the post webinar outputs. So that's all I was going to say. I think on behalf of the rest of the leadership team, a really big thank you for joining us today. And if anyone has any questions or any follow-up thoughts on today's session, please do reach out to us. So goodbye, everyone. Hope everyone has a good rest of the day.